I'm going to start with a mix of this and that. A little bit of technology and African traditions, African cultures, things that we build in Africa. Because I think it's one of the most important movements in the world at the moment. The movement of exchange that comes out of Africa is what we need. It's what we need to connect everybody. We need to go back to the roots. And when you see movies like 2012, I don't know if people here remember that movie, the destruction of this whole planet. And the only continent, even in that American movie where everybody survived, was Africa. And you saw all these ships coming from Europe, from America, everywhere, people coming back to Africa, and the Africans standing there. Hey, guys, come here, you're safe. So, this is the story of a griot. Sabem o que é griot, né? Griot. It's a story of silence. A drum with no beats, no resonance in its chamber. Somebody's playing, beating, trying to express himself on that. To share his story, his day-to-day life, his dreams to the world, but nobody hears it. The African griot travels to tell his story, loaded with advice and wisdom, disguised in clever tales and proverbs, but nobody can hear him. Desperately, he grabs the djembe and says, Je. What does Je mean? Je means peace. Be means gather. Come together. Let's come together in peace and show our cultures, our heritage to the world. It was loud around the griot because of Facebook and Instagram and all those things. Nobody could hear the djembe anymore. He would tap, but no sound comes out. People don't hear him. At that moment, I connected to the djembe, to the griot. I looked in his eyes and I saw, hey, I'm a storyteller like him. It's me, actually. And nobody hears my stories. My African stories are dying, everything's disappearing, because everybody is focused and everybody's trying, okay, it's justified. Everybody is trying to tell his story. But we don't have amplifiers. We don't have means to make our stories resonate in the world. It's hard for us to do that. And that's our problem, basically. So when I connected to the griot, I finally heard what he said. The griot was saying that the fool speaks, the wise man listens. The fool speaks, the wise man listens. And my connection to Africa as a person born outside Cape Verdian qui migra antes de nascer, my connection came through this guy, Amilcar Cabral. He's incredibly inspiring. I've been investigating and researching him for years now. And one of the last stories that I heard is that in 1978, Mr. Jimmy Cliff went to Senegal to give a concert. And when he went through the public and got on stage, everybody was happy and yelling, now Jimmy Cliff is gonna sing. You know Jimmy Cliff, no? I can see clearly now the rain is gone. But he stayed there. He got on stage and he stays there. He doesn't sing. And he says, until I don't get my boonie hat back, minha súmbia, my boonie hat, aquele chapéu que Cabral tinha, I will not start to sing. The people are there in the crowd and start getting nervous. And Jimmy Cliff is standing there and he says, when I was coming up here, somebody took my boonie and I want my boonie back, or else I will not sing. So then all of a sudden you see people reaching a boonie forward over the hands like that. And he gets his boonie back and he says, Cabral gave me this boonie and I would not sing without this. And everywhere I go, I hear that kind of stories about Amilcar Cabral. So he was silenced. Just like the griot, he was silenced a long time ago before we got independence, before Guinea got independence, because he freed 2 countries, not one. That was not enough for him. He freed 2 countries. Before we got independence, they silenced him. He was assassinated. Just like our cultures keep disappearing, everything keeps disappearing. And people say that if he was still alive, he would have become a dictator maybe, like many African leaders. But the problem is, what happens very often in Africa is like the best way to understand what happens in Africa is to take the idea of a soccer team. People are playing soccer somewhere, let's say Portugal, this great team. You see Portugal starting to develop a good team, you remove the best players in a way or another. You silence them in a way or another. What happens to Portugal? In soccer, they will become weak. Because without the best players, you're going to choose the second best players, and then the country becomes weak. That's what has been going on in Africa for years and years, since the first countries got independence. Every time there was a good leader, somebody who would have chosen a democratic way and something that helps the people, he's removed. But I believe that Cabral would have continued as my hero. And heroes are very important. Heroes in history books and heroes in films. Reality heroes and fictive heroes. In school, they would tell me in Europe about Napoleon and all these Jeanne d'Arc and all these people there that were superheroes, basically, in their history books. And when I would, in the 80s and 90s, when I would turn on TV and see Superman flying around, and that woman in America somewhere far away saying, "Help, help," and Superman would hear him, and he would go there and save her, I would ask myself, what does Superman do when he flies over Africa? Why doesn't he do something for us? Like, he flies around like this, maybe. But basically, we need to create our own heroes, our own Supermans, to tell our stories. Because that's the only way that we can continue and be proud of our cultures and gain back what we are and show that to the world. Because it's time for Africa now. This is Facebook in the 60s. I know it didn't exist, but let's imagine that Cabral had Facebook in the 60s. What would Cabral have posted on his timeline? He would have made a check-in from the United Nations. He would have taken a selfie with the Pope, because he met the Pope at the time. He would have made other check-ins from the Mata in Guinea, like nagging the other soldiers and the enemy and saying, "Look, I'm hiding here." That's the interesting thing about Facebook, is how you can use it positively. So I ask myself, what am I proud of on my Facebook wall? How am I using those amazing tools to do something good, to change something in this world? So I started working on a project called Cabralista, because I made this documentary because every time I would go somewhere and talk about Amilcar Cabral, or talk about Sankara, talk about all these African leaders, they would say, "Oh, we know that kind of ideology. That's Marxism, that's Gaullism, that's all kind of ism, but that's not something you guys invented in Africa." So I thought, okay, we need our own ism, our own ist, our Cabralist. We need to be able to say, "I am a Cabralist." Cabral wrote a lot of books and theories, just like Marx did, just like many other big thinkers did. And as long as we don't define these kind of ideologies, people will always think that we stole it from somebody else. So we need to define whatever we think. So with Institut Pet Pirsch, here in Cape Verde, another project that I'm working on that goes in the same direction was to create a system for us to save the histories of our heroes. How do we archive whatever happened in the 60s or in the 50s when they were working on things? I went to Guinea, I went to many places where I saw documents of Amilcar Cabral and other people that were disappearing. If we don't preserve our history, we will not have a future. They always say that youth, young people, are the future. But before being the future, young people are the past. Because if we don't save our past, if kids, if a child doesn't grow up with his past in him, he will lose his identity. And he will be nobody in future. As long as you don't know who you are, as long as you don't know where you're coming from, you can't know where you're going. So we developed this project called Archivo.cloud, which is a system, an online platform that allows African organizations, NGOs, and everything to save whatever documents they have and put them online and preserve the history so that researchers can go behind and study whatever happened and develop something around it. So Cabral talked also a lot about neocolonialism. He said the problem is not colonialism. The problem was not the fight that he was fighting at the time. The problem is what comes after. That's the second fight, and that's the biggest fight that we would have to do. I'm not going to talk much about that. I'm going to give you guys the example of Joana. Joana de lá de Tchada. Ele queria para Sacupira, então ele chama, como é que é esse nome? Eu esqueci o nome. Parece-me chique. Chique é chofer taxi. So Joana wants to go to Sucupira, to the marketplace, and she calls Chico, a taxi driver. So he comes, picks her up, he pays, she pays, money stays here between Joana and Chico. Money stays here wherever it happened. And then this is João. João de lá de Saint-Anton. João from Santo Antão. He came to São Vicente, he's a fisherman. He came to São Vicente to sell his fish to the restaurants all over the place. So Maria has a restaurant, Maria buys João's fish, the money stays in São Vicente. Very easy to understand. But now comes a big change. Most of you guys might have heard of Uber, Airbnb, and all these services on demand. These new websites that come up where you can sign up, create an account, sell whatever you have, and somebody else can buy it. It can be a service, can be something you want to do for someone, can be a product, can be anything. So now again, the same person again, Joana, wants to go to Sacupira, she uses Uber. So what happens? She gets the money, but a part of the money goes to the United States. Then again, the fisherman, there's not an app for that yet, for the fisherman. He has no app to sell his fish. But somebody will come and invent an app where he can go fish, put everything available online, restaurants come, put whatever they need online, and make their transaction. So then Maria can buy the fish through that app and bring it to her restaurant. But what happens again? A cut of that money goes to the United States. The griot, if I would tell the griot about that, he would, that reminds me of the time that we had to pay taxes to Europe and other places. Why every time I buy something in Africa, every time I drive a car around in Africa, would the money, a part of that money, go to the US? Why every time somebody does something, because somebody else developed a website, the money needs to go to the US? It's fully understandable. They call it capitalism. Okay, fine. But let's be capitalist too. That app that doesn't exist yet, I tell you guys here, who's going to invent that? Okay, that would be perfect. An Uber for Cape Verde, who's going to invent that? Let's make sure that the resources stay here. Let's make great apps, send them out, and show them to the world. That's what we need to do. And that's what I call digital colonialism. We need to fight that. And it's an important point, a very important point. You see, M-Pesa in Kenya, M-Pesa is a payment system that was developed in Kenya. They never got a chance to export it. but they were the first to make SMS-based mobile payment. If Kenya was a country like the US, they would have taken over the world with that, and everybody around the world would be paying with M-Pesa. But we didn't get that chance. So I developed this I'm still developing because it's an ongoing work, this platform called Afryk that is all about creating systems for us to make our own propaganda methods, to make our own apps, to make everything we need so that our cultures, our history, our identity can survive here on this continent. And the storytellers in Africa have to be story hustlers. We have no other choice. We don't have the means to be something else, to be something bigger or greater in that sense. So let's start with hustling. Let's do something in our way, and let's develop something that takes us forward. So I have to give an example, and I'm going to take the djembe. I hope it's still on. People ask me many times, so how do you do that? How do you actually prove us that it's possible to mix African stuff with whatever we have for our cultures? So I made this little thing here. I took the djembe, and I added some electronics to it. You just take a 3D printer, develop something different. So now the djembe is a speaker, a Bluetooth speaker. This is just for fun, just to show that it's possible to make African traditions become something technological, something modern. But then how do you play djembe? Nothing comes out. So you just make the apps, while you then play your djembe here. That's how we need to think. And then it's not only about the djembe, it's also about other African instruments that are disappearing. Like, for example, here in Cape Verde, you have the simboa. And I hope everybody here knows what a simboa is. It's the only real African instrument historically. É instrumento de Cape Verde, simboa. So that's the kind of things that we need to make apps for these instruments to survive. Or in this case, for example, also I just put here a kalimba. Then you just play kalimba here. Oh, the speaker just went off, the Bluetooth is off. But it's just to show you guys that everything is possible. Instead of looking to the US or other places, let's look to Africa. Thank you.